Hey, I'm so glad that you guys are back. Sorry that we had to cancel last week because of the storms. I know that that was probably disappointing to some of you, but I think it's all going to work out in the end, even if it's maybe throwing some people off for this week too. But glad that you guys are here. We have an incredible guest speaker tonight, Dr. John Dyer. I can call him Doctor. Kevin Wong doesn't like us to call him Doctor, but we're going to call Dr. Dyer, or if you prefer John, whatever you want.
It's great. Whatever
it's
you
all
guys
going
want
to
to
be
do.
great.
Yeah.
He is an assistant professor of theology at Dallas Seminary. He is also one of the vice presidents there in enrollment and technology. I'm abbreviated the title, but it's great. It's the idea. And he is... I would pretty much consider you the technology guru of DTS. Like, that's probably the most accurate title as far as your reputation. Is like, he has a theology of technology. Right. He actually is really good with technology. He can code, and he can think strategically about how to use it. That's kind of how I've heard about you. But I'll be honest, guys. I have never spent a lot of quality time with Dr. Dyer, even though my last church was the church he went to, and I went to DTS. Yeah. So I'm excited to get to hear from you tonight.
Yeah, this will be great.
And it's going to be incredible. So let me pray for our time, and then I'll turn it over. Father God, thank you so much for this group of people who have decided to jump into this class. I pray, Lord, that as we dig into these issues of how humanity and technology interact, that we will leave here curious and open-minded, but also cautious where we need to be cautious. And we'll make better decisions for ourselves, for our families, and in our communities. God, bless Dr. Dyer as he teaches tonight. I pray that this would just be an incredible 2 hours. And Lord, thank you that he has offered his time tonight. It's in your son's name, by the power of your Spirit, that we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for being here. I always appreciate folks at a church that really want to learn and go deep and spend a couple hours talking about something. So thank you for spending time on a Monday night. You know, we're not doing that as much as churches, and I'm just delighted that you guys are willing to do that. So we'll talk through some technology matters and why technology matters to us, and this overarching theme of the biblical story moving from the garden to the city is sort of the direction we're going to go. And I'll repeat that theme a couple of times. So, but I just, want to introduce myself a little bit, so I'll just give you a couple introductory slides. This is my family when we went to Durham University. You can see there on the left is where I went and did my doctoral work. So they had a Center for Digital Theology there. My kids were, 4 and 6 at the time, and you can see this is like our big formal portrait there. And my son only has one shoe on. So, that's about how good of parents we are. We, get about 3/4 of the things right. And this is them growing up, and this is them more recently. So we're right in that 14 and 16-year-old stage. They've been delightful to kids growing up with Rebecca and Benjamin. They're both a blast. And my wife is also a Dr. Dyer. She is in literature and philosophy and now is a principal of a local charter school. So she's just amazing at so many things. She's a great teacher, but she's also good at spreadsheets and also good at leadership and vision. So she's got the whole package. And anyway, so we're in a fun stage of life, but I've spent the last about 20 years at DTS. My first job was just being a programmer there, so I had done a lot of work outside, and DTS had a job, which was great for me to go to seminary. So I built some online education software for DTS and then open sourced that, and that's now in a bunch of the internet. So that's a fun thing just to be a part of. My kids don't really care about this part of it, though, but the video player and audio player is on StarWars.com, and they always think that that's really cool. So that was originally DTS code that's running there, so that's kind of fun. I also, over time, have worked on some related to technology and theology more directly, not just secular stuff. So one of them was when I was in seminary, I would always ask my professors, what's the best commentary on Ruth or, Colossians or whatever it is that I was going through. And they would give me these lists. And as a programmer, if I see multiple lists, I see a database that should be combined. And so I put those all together on a little website called bestcommentaries.com. And it just aggregates as many reviews as possible. And so that probably gets, I don't know, 500,000 hits a month or something like that. It's a pretty popular tool out there, which is fun. And then other little things like, I was looking for a good Bible reading plan, and I didn't like any of them I found, so I made this Bible reading plan generator so you can check off the books you want and the number of days, and if you don't want to read on Sunday, you can turn that off, and, all kinds of different things. You make it color-coded, and it's just kind of a fun project, right? My favorite project, though, really is if you've ever studied any Greek or Hebrew, you may have realized that it has some things that English doesn't have that is missing. And one of those is if you have, do any of you guys have a Bible app on your phone? Like the Bible app, right? It's called YouVersion. Well, I decided to make YALLVersion. And what YALLVersion does is all those places where the Greek and Hebrew have a second person plural, a difference between you singular and you plural that modern English doesn't have, it goes in there and just corrects that, just updates that and makes sure that you can see what it's really saying. So it's funny, but it's also true. Because, and for example, this passage is really speaking to the whole nation of Israel. It's talking to all of them, not just the individual. And so you can see that in all kinds of places. So if you go to yallversion.com, you can go and look through that. So it's a project that I did that part of it, but also have done a bunch of other work. So it's become a little bit of a custom translation. And then, you've heard in the last couple years, generative AI has been a topic that you've heard a lot about since probably 2022. When ChatGPT came out. That subject's been around for about 10 years. So in 2017, I bought the domain name worship.ai just to sort of demonstrate where these things were going. And if you go there, you can get it to generate songs for you. But the thing about it generating songs, this is very primitive generative technology. It lets you pick between the Psalms as the training data or modern worship songs or older hymns. And then you can kind of see what you train is what you get back out, the language. So just those are the kind of experiments I like doing. And then I got to write a couple things about theology and technology. So these have been things I've been interested in for a long time. And, when I was a kid, my dad would, bring computer parts home and he would say, don't touch this. I'm going to work on it when I get home. And of course, I would spend all day trying to figure out how to install it. So this is kind of what I looked like as a kid growing up. This is not actually me, but if you remember those beige computers, this is a lot like what I was doing growing up. So what I want to ask you is just a question to get ourselves started. If you think about just for a second, when you think about technology, do you think about it in terms of it being primarily good, primarily bad, or just sort of neutral? And let me let you think about that for a minute. I'm just going to give you a bunch of examples, and then we'll come back and we'll dialogue about that question. So, for example, you think this young woman is getting a custom 3D printed arm that will grow with her as she ages. And you can see once she gets it all, attached, she's able to open and close her hand, which is pretty cool. And then this young man is about to get his first cochlear implant, and so he's going to be able to hear his dad's voice for the first time. Look at that, just that amazement of seeing and hearing. And you think about when John was in prison, and he said, "Are you really Jesus? Are you really the Messiah?" And Jesus' message back to him, remember what it was? It was the blind see and the deaf hear. Yeah. A pretty amazing moment. And then this is some technology up at MIT. This is from Rosalind Picard. And it's facial recognition technology that is designed to be able to tell what a person's emotions are while someone is talking. And this is not, for government surveillance or for selling products. It's really for autistic kids who can't understand the other person's reaction to them. And so it's supposed to give them feedback, so it sort of restores something that they didn't have. And pretty amazing stuff. But then again, we all probably remember scenes like this during the pandemic, when we had some type of separation and pastors were trying to figure out what to do, and we had all these images out there of pastors and trying to do different things. And then if you have kids or you're an adult yourself, the conversations I had with my own kids when they were very young was not about like if they were going to see pornography, how do I protect them? I wanted to protect them, and we have filters and we have all the things, but I knew this is a question of when they're going to see this, not if. And so you have a very early conversation with your kids about, hey, you're going to see scary things on your screen at some point. What I want you to do is close it and just come talk to me. So it's immediately kind of reduce the shame. This is not a hidden thing. When I come talk to me. But these are the conversations that we're having with our kids, right? There's all kinds of data out there about, our social media and how they're related. One of the most striking ones that you can see out there is this one, which is young kids, kind of that tween age, and you can see the homicide rate going down a little bit, how many kids are getting killed, but you can see the suicide rate, the blue line is going up. Now, do you notice what year that starts going up? Yeah, 2007, 2008. Yeah, what happened that year? Yeah, subprime mortgage crisis, right? I'm just kidding. Yeah, there is that. There was a lot of other turmoil going on in the country, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard not to look at that and say this is really the beginning of smartphones. Now, it would be way simplistic to say that all of this is due to smartphones and smartphones are bad and we should get rid of them. That would be overly simplistic. Again, it's hard though not to see that data and say, man, there is something going on there. And then, what we did last week, we had another election cycle that I'm sure you talked about a little bit. But what's interesting about this one is it's showing that, left and right have always been there. And in the 90s, they were a certain way. And in the early 2000s, they were a certain way. But somewhere in that period of, iPhone being released and social media kind of coming on the scene with Facebook and Twitter and all of that sort of stuff, you start to see people further and further apart. What that means is that most people hold the same political view they did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. They just hold it with a lot more vehemence, with a lot more anger. They're much more willing to say that the person on the other side is not just wrong, but is evil, is not just someone to disagree with, but someone to entirely avoid and to dismiss as almost even being human. And so this is sort of where we are as a society in some ways. And then, I think about my own kids and what they're growing up with. They're growing up with all these weird things. So there is things like, is Dad, what is he doing with this thing? Like, what is that device that he's always on? What does it do? What is it for? What is it meant to be to do? And so I think that they're really struggling to know what it is that they're supposed to do with these things. We're going to have these fun robot questions in a little bit about what do we do with our AIs, in a little bit when they read it, if they ever understand it and they begin to ask questions, how do we answer those things? And then there's just good old dumb stuff like this, which is just cool. I think it's just fun to have your light bulb be changed by that. So let me just give you a couple of examples out there of thought that some people have had. So this is Neil Postman. Have you guys read any Neil Postman? So Postman wrote a little bit about technology and society in the 70s and 80s and really had a lot of prescient good thoughts. And he has this to say, he said, remember, technology is not part of God's plan, but it's a product of human creativity and hubris. And then Billy Graham says it's time for the church to make use of technology. In the midst of chaos, emptiness, and despair, there's hope in the person of Jesus Christ. So use technology. And then he says this, like most technologies, television itself is morally neutral. It is what we do with it or fail to do with it that makes the difference. So, in your view, would you say technology is good, bad, or neutral? What do you think? Any goods out there? Got one? Oh, maybe two. Maybe yeah. Okay, so maybe I feel like you're doing like a 75%. It's not. It's like, yeah, something like that. Any mostly bads here in the audience? Okay, I got a mostly bad. All right, I respect that. I like that. Any like mostly neutrals? Okay, yeah, let's get a number of hands. Okay, so if you were going to say, hey, why is technology mostly good? One of the goods. Let's give an example. Yeah. Like right now, we're very technological, right? Yeah. Even though my computer's not connected to the internet, but we're doing lots of things, yeah.
You showed some powerful examples of why that's good.
Okay. Yeah. Those are really good things. Okay. And then how about the negative? If you were like, hey, in general, I'm
Well, in general, I know where we're headed with this. It's neutral, but if I'm honest, my initial thought of it, when I think about technology and how it impacts our world, the bad is more emphasized in my mind.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a lack of education.
Yeah. I mean, it could be. Yeah, you're seeing maybe in your own world or sphere, you're seeing more of the downsides and the plus sides.
We have lived without good technology in the past. We could live without it.
Yeah.
So is it worth the bad?
Yeah. It's good. How about those of you that are going, hey, I'm embracing the more neutral view. Why would you say, hey, I just sort of think of technology as being neutral?
I feel that way.
So you feel like it's mostly neutral?
Yeah. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. Depends on the character of the individual who's using it, who's designing it.
Okay. So, yeah, you're saying it can be used for good, used for bad, but the character of the individual is what's more emphasized. Yeah. Up front, yeah.
So I feel like good in that technology can be used to save people's lives, and yet our children are being robbed from being able to play out of doors and be able to roam free and build things and work with their hands.
Yeah. Yeah, so you see all these good things, and yet you see all these other negative things. Any other neutral people want to give a thought?
I would say neutral, but there is some good aspect of it in the sense that if we're supposed to be cultivating the earth and maintaining the earth and supporting the earth, that feels like there's a technological progression component to that. So like agriculture, for instance.
Yeah.
Agriculture is like an early type of technology. That's very aligned with the idea of cultivating the earth.
Okay. So it does seem like there's maybe a theological component going on here that we could think of as being good. So here's the thing that I've kind of set you up, and I've almost set myself up for something here. What I would actually like to do is to argue that technology is not neutral. So it's our instinct to say that it is, but I would like to argue against that view. Okay, so I want to have you come out here going, I do not believe technology is neutral. If you still believe technology is neutral when you walk out, I have failed as a speaker and as a teacher. Okay, does that sound like a good teeing something up? All right, here we go. So let me give you an example of kind of what I mean by that. Here's just kind of a jokey version of that. So if you read these, do they come across differently to you? And make sure you read this one down here. Do they come across differently to you? Do they say something different? A little slightly different message? Or are they the same?
No, they're different.
They're different, okay. So it's the same exact words, but something's different. What's different? The left one feels like Last of the Mohicans, okay. Okay. Oh, you're doing a Liam Neeson on both. Okay, that's so fun. Oh, okay. So it's the same words, but you're saying that it's totally different messages, huh? And what's affecting the message? Okay, yeah, so all caps. So when you change the case, something changes in it. What else is changing here? Okay, so you're coding one as you're kind of seeing different images as masculine or feminine or different font types or something like that, yeah.
Hearts on the left.
What's that? Hearts on the left. Okay, you notice that, yeah.
The one on the right looks like it could have been written in blood.
Oh, the one on the right looks like blood, yes. Okay, so you're noticing again, we can say the same thing, but somehow the message is being altered by something in it. And so in this case, I might say that the font choice is not neutral, right? The font choice affects the message that you receive or don't receive in this. So let me give you another example. About 20 or so years ago, I was a youth pastor at a little church down in College Station. And this is before, projectors were really common. And so, our kids, would bring their Bibles to church, and we had a stack of Bibles, and we'd hand them out, like youth pastors do. And, only about half the kids would bring their own Bible, and the other half the kids we'd hand out the Bibles to or whatever. And I thought, man, it would be so cool. I mean, I'm a tech guy. What if we could get a projector, And we could use it for all kinds of Bible teaching, and we could use it for, other activities. And so I thought, I believe at this point that technology is neutral, right? All that matters is how I use it. That's all I need to think about. So I said, as long as I use it for good things and not bad things, which is R-rated movies, but also PG movies from the 80s. Those are also things you can't show in youth group. Anyway, some of you have never been in youth group before, but if you try to resurrect those 80s movies, they are not okay. Anyway, so show good things and not show bad things, right? That's all I needed to know, because technology is neutral. That's what I believe. So what do you think happened when I started showing the Bible to my kids on screen?
They stopped bringing their Bible.
They stopped bringing their Bibles. Now, why would they do that?
Because they felt like they didn't need them.
You sure that I didn't put a message on screen that said, do not bring your Bible to church? Nope.
Laziness.
Yeah, we could see that. So what I mean by this is that I'm using it for morally good ends and not morally bad ends. And yet, there are these unintentional effects of this, one of which is that kids no longer bring their Bibles to church. And those kids that don't have Bibles, they no longer know that Psalms are in the middle and the spicy stuff is just to the right of that, right? They don't know that. So you're going to raise your hand? Can you?
Well, Like now, you make it
Yes, yeah. But great point. So you're bringing up, why is it bad not to bring your Bible to church, which is a fantastic question. That brings up the next thing. So you realize that from going back to Moses when he writes down the first parts of Scripture, all the way to Martin Luther, 3,000 years, no one has a Bible. No one. There might be a one in a church or in a synagogue or something like that, but no one has a Bible. No one has a quiet time in the way that we do. No one has a favorite verse because there are no verse numbers. They don't exist, right? So, the printing press comes along. About 100 years later, someone invents verse numbers, this very technological thing that is impressed onto our Bible, our biblical text, and it forces us to see things and unsee things because of all those numbers. And then in the 1800s, paper gets a little bit cheaper. And then in the 1950s, there's all these translations, and there's all these different versions. And so there's like the Teen Study Bible and the New King James and the Cat Lovers Bible and all these different things that everybody has. And what I noticed was all of a sudden, all my kids were looking at the same thing at the same time. And so they were no longer each having their own translation and their own personal, individualized copy of the Bible for their own relationship with Jesus. Now it was something that we're doing together. We're all looking at the same thing at the same time. It's not the same as what Moses would have experienced or what Jesus would have experienced or what Aquinas would have experienced, but it's something new and different. And so in this way, you can see that whenever you introduce a new technology in here, I didn't put up a thing that said, stop bringing your Bible to church. I was at a Bible church. Imagine being a youth pastor at a Bible church, and you introduce a technology that means kids no longer bring their Bibles. That's pretty bad. That's a pretty huge fail. But what I'm pointing out here is that every time we introduce technology and we sort of retrieve something from the past and we lose something at the same time. And in this way, what I mean is that technology is not neutral. And so another simple example is this fun one with a shovel. So again, you think of a shovel as being this neutral thing. I mean, what could be more neutral than a shovel? Again, there are good things you can do with it and bad things you can do with it. The theme is pretty evident. Yeah, you like that? So there's good things and there's bad things you can do with it. But if you ask just about anybody, if you use a shovel and you change the world, so you make a hole in the world, what happens to you while you use a shovel? You get stronger, yeah. So the more you use it, your back muscles, your arm muscles are going to start to shape. What about your hands? It calluses, yeah. So you get blisters and those form into calluses, yeah. Maybe you get knowledge of the soil. I live in Irving and it's all clay. It's terrible. But you start to learn these things, right? So you change. And here's my little silly illustration for just saying that part of you begins to change over time as you use that tool. Now, here's the thing. Does it matter whether or not I'm using it for morally good ends or morally bad ends? If I am building a church with Habitat for Humanity, or if I am axe murdering and burying all the body parts, does that have any bearing on whether or not I am shaped by the tool? No, right? So when we use tools, they kind of have a two-way interface. Me and the world, I change the world with the tool I use, but the tool changes me as I use it. And so I am transformed in the usage of that thing. And so here's the difference of the world we're in, is that these tools, primarily over the course of human history have been these physical things that have, changed our bodies in some physical way the more we use them. And now we're in this world where, we are not just physical creatures, we also have an immaterial self. And now these types of tools are beginning to, affect more of our mind and our soul. And this is the era in which we now live. So the argument I want to make for you is this, that technology is, in a theological sense, is good, full stop. It's part of when God says, it's good, it's very good. This is part of that. So you hinted at that a little bit ago about just sort of our command and call. And yet it always comes with these unintended side effects every time we use it. And so we want to be very attentive to that. We certainly, as Christians, want to be attentive to using technology for morally good things and not using them in ways that dishonor God and his people. And yet we also want to be, even now more than ever, more attentive to the unintended consequences that come with it. And so this is where we want to go with this. And so I might say in all these different ways. So we're going to do some theology, and then we're going to come back and look at these pieces. And so a simple definition of technology might be something like this. It's a God-given transformative force. The good part is this God-givenness of it, and the transformative part of it is the thing that we need to realize that in a fallen world in some ways, there's certainly the sinful uses, but there's all of these other things that can transform us and deform us in particular ways. So when I think about the word technology, we were talking before just a little bit ago, and somebody was saying, well, I'm not nearly as high-tech as my kids and all that sort of stuff. And when you think about the word technology, most of us are probably thinking today like internet-connected devices or something like that. But I'll give you a fun definition of technology. This comes from Alan Kay. He's the guy who invented the mouse and the idea of like windows and screens. And so Steve Jobs came over and saw that. It was like, I am stealing that for the first Mac. Anyway, so Alan Kay has this great definition of technology. All right. So probably it's almost like the older you are, the longer you laugh, or the bigger it is, because when you think about these different eras of time, all of us have grown up in a world where airplanes are just a thing. We don't really question them; they just exist. But everything before you were born is just stuff. That's the way the world works. And everything from like 0 to 35 is the cool, awesome stuff you can build a career on. And everything after 35 is the destruction of society and the degradation of our children's minds. It just feels that way. That comes from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that sort of 3-stage thing. But I joke about that, but I also recognize that I think our kids are actually in a harder area than we are. They are faced with more technological challenges, more sort of formative, powerful tools than we had growing up. And so I have a lot of compassion on our kids because we're the ones handing them this stuff, right? And so anything we say about kids these days is exactly the things that we gave them, or at least our culture is giving them. So when you think about this whole idea of technology as neutral, I want to put this on a more like philosophical level, and then we'll get back to the theology level. When you think about how different kind of sociologists and people who study technology and society, they look at it in this spectrum. And one side of this is determinism, which is saying that built into a technology is some value and some direction. This is on this side on your left. And in some ways, that technology ends up driving and dominating society. Our more kind of common view that when you ask somebody about it, they often go on the right side. They would say, hey, technology is just kind of by itself, just neutral, but people are largely in control. But the more we study it, we realize that neither of those views is exactly right, that it isn't entirely true that technology has no value. So like a really common, a little bit of a punchy example might be like a gun. Oftentimes people will say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Just saying it's entirely in people's control. But if you are a responsible gun owner, you have a series of rules in your home about where guns go and what you do, and do you ever put your finger on the trigger. You have a whole set of things around it because you recognize it's really not neutral. It's good at it, has values built into it. It has this idea of long-range destruction built into it. And because of that ability, you need to treat it in a different way than you treat anything else in your house, right? If you're on the responsible side of things. So you're recognizing that technology has some type of value system, but we don't want to say that it dominates society at the same time. And so there's all these things in here, these Christian things and the non-Christian things that are looking at how do technology and society operate, and do we typically think of things as positive or negative? And so sometimes people are feeling like, man, technology is so bad, it's taking society in a negative direction. And so they're going to be kind of down in this lower right-hand side, lower left-hand side. But someone might be like, hey, let's just think for the best. And they're kind of in that upper right-hand side. So people can kind of plot themselves in these different ways. But what I find to be useful is to go back to our previous example, is just to think about technology this way. There are, good and bad things we can do intentionally with technology. This is what I want to do or what I want to avoid doing. But for us, we want to be attentive to these unintentional things that are happening with technology at the same time. So we can be thinking about, what kind of person is God calling me to be? In my society to be, my home to be, my church to be, and how do I mitigate some of these lower things? So just, again, to plot what I did before, there's these really good things, there are these, maybe bad things, and then there's these things that I would say maybe are more negative, but also maybe potentially positive, like unintentional. I didn't realize that was going to happen when I brought it in. So we start to think about all kinds of things out there, like genetic modification. We could say, okay, there's the bad thing, like we're going to make these genetically modified people. Dr. Frankenstein would make the monster, but then you have these other like intentional things that people are trying to do to feed more people, and then there's these other negative things that maybe you invent something that ends up destroying some other thing that you didn't mean to do, but then you may also be able to protect other plants. So there's all these interesting things you can think through with all types of technology. So I want to ask you guys a couple of things. If you think about something like online church, what are some of the intentionally good uses of online church? So let's start in that top left. What's that?
You can see it when you're sick.
Yeah, so when you're sick, right, you can actually, someone who could not come, could physically not be there, can now be there in some way. And so instead of maybe going to church twice a month and then being, gone for a whole month, you can now at least have some participation. Yeah, great. Any other intentionally positive things? Yeah.
We were on vacation in the outback of New Mexico, and we could watch our service.
Okay, yeah, so even it was your choice to leave, a little bit different than that, but still, now it's also you have a choice to participate and connect and stay and, connect with the series. Yeah, that's great. So sickness, travel, yeah.
Somebody could stumble on it and read the Word of God accidentally, be convinced that people won't.
Yeah, so maybe some type of, you said evangelism, outreach, something like that. Someone can maybe sample the church before they come, all that kind of stuff. Okay, good. Well, I mean, what would be like the intentionally bad use of online church streaming technologies? Okay, we got a lot of quickies there. Yeah, no fellowship, avoiding people, maybe no fellowship. Maybe even say no accountability, something like that. Yeah. How about some of the unintentional? We don't have to do specifically either box, but just some of the things that you saw come out of that you didn't think was going to happen, but maybe did. Oh yeah. So depending on your sacramental theology, maybe you would or wouldn't participate in that. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, loneliness. Yeah, maybe you thought you were going to maybe connect, but then it ends up you feel more disconnected in the end. Yeah.
They don't come back to church.
Okay.
They've been pandemic. If you're watching it at home.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what was originally like I can't go, now it's like I don't want to go or something like that. Yeah. And I think, there's, oh yeah, go ahead, sir.
The church can accidentally stop serving Christ and start serving the camera.
Yeah. So maybe maybe the church begins to realize like this kind of sermon gets more clicks or more views, and so they just begin to drift into that type of clickbaity type content, something like that. And I think in general, turning church into like a consumable product, we already do that partially, and we've got screens and all that sort of stuff, and we record it, we put it on, and then you think, well, maybe all of Christianity is just consuming content. Well, why would I do that on a Sunday? You start thinking about it in a different way. So yeah, there's all different things we can fill in on these things. We could do the same thing with AI. We'll come back to this one if you guys want to think about that a little bit more, but we could think through those things. So here's what I want to do. I want to jump into what I would think of as just the theological story, the biblical story. We're just going to walk through this. And the point here is for us to think about, look at the biblical story anew with kind of technological eyes of creativity and human making. Let's look at that again. And hopefully by spending a little bit of time in that, then that lets us then look at our own world with biblical eyes. So we're going to look through the biblical story with technological eyes and look through our modern world of technology with biblical eyes. So, we start out, you guys know your first verse of the Bible. The very first thing we see about God is that God is a creator, that God makes things, and that he makes things from nothing, and then he sort of gives us a command in a minute for what we would do. And we see that God's creative process even has some order and beauty and symmetry to it. So you've probably seen these kinds of things before where, the first 3 days are maybe separating or forming, and the next 3 days are filling in some way. So the first day, he's separating light from dark. Then he's separating the water above from the water below, and then the water from the land, and then filling those with appropriate things. So the first day is light and dark. What is the fourth day? What does he fill that with? Not quite yet. So it's going to be appropriate to number one. If that's light and dark, what that would be the appropriate thing to fill it with, right? So if day 2 was waters above and waters below, what would you fill those with? Yeah, fish, right? And then if the third day is land, what would you fill that with? Animals, right? And then also there's this pattern of rest. So God is this separating and then this filling process that he does. And so, regardless of your views, I'm sure another session you guys can talk about all of the views of creation. Here you do see something wonderful about the way that God makes things, that there's an appropriateness to what he fills things with. We talked about how, content and form, matter even in that little example I gave earlier. Here again, these things seem to be appropriate. There's appropriate creatures for each of the things that God made. And then also that his pattern of rest is really important, and that he gives us this, his creativity includes this pattern of separation and filling and rest. And I would just say, in some way right now, our technology is resistant to this. It's sort of fill anything with everything and never stop. That's the message of most modern tools, is to do the opposite of this, that there is nothing that's appropriate or inappropriate, and there is no rest for us, that we should be like our machines. And in fact, I think the way that we should create is more like the way that God creates. So I think you have been talking a little bit about, in this series, what humans are, but it's kind of fun to look at the passages here where when you study some Hebrew, you look at it in a little bit more literal way. It says the fruiting things are going to bear fruit, the flying things are going to fly, the swimming things are going to swim. And then humans come along, and what are humans? What's the first thing we find out about humans? Hey, that's the name of the series. Yeah. So there's these doings that each of the creatures have, and then there's a being that we have made in the image of God that we see in Genesis 1. I do think that at least part of our human making is reflected in the image of God, and we can see that in some of the different theories of the image of God. So I think you have probably talked this through, but if you were, before I jump into it, what are some of the models of the image of God you've learned so far? Yeah. So God is just and loving. In terms of how does the image of God work? What is it? How do we have it or bear it or something like that? Yeah, these are great aspects of God. Absolutely.
I don't know. One of them was in the things we do, in the things we do, we might be, or in relationships.
It's good. No, that's what we're reviewing here. That's good. Yeah. Well, I can review a couple of them. There's probably three sort of more common ones, maybe a fourth we could talk about, but let me skip ahead a second here, not to this one. Sorry, I think I repeated a slide here, so let me just skip ahead to this one. Look at that. See, there you go. Image of God. So one of them is this idea of substantive, there's something about us that has some trait that's exactly like God. And so up here I've got soul or rational abilities. Most of the history of the church, the assumption was that our reason was what made us like God. So animals are just animalistic. They just go after their desires, but we can think, we can reason, we can talk through. So, our Aristotle, Plato, all the sort of pre-New Testament guys would have been more in this direction, that we are thinking creatures. We are, rational animals or something like that. Now, this view started to get a little bit questioned when we came to modern science. So modern science begins to say, really, we're not that different than animals. We're physiologically just like them. We're a lot like primates. They can think in some sort of ways. And so this begins to kick theologians off to say, well, is there something other than this? And underneath the hood, there is this question of, well, what if someone can't reason? What if someone's born with different abilities and they don't necessarily have this part of it? Does it mean that they lost the image of God, or is there something about them that still has inherent dignity and worth? And I think we would all say yes. So how do we have a model that helps with that? And so the other two, one of them is to look at Genesis, which we'll look at in a minute, and say, what are the things that Genesis 1 calls us to actually do in the world? And so this gets a little bit more at the ideas of creativity and human making and having dominion over earth. And we're going to focus on that and what we're doing. But again, I wanted to make sure I note that not everyone has all the physical capabilities and mental capabilities, and that those people are still have the same dignity that every other image bearer has. So this gets us to this other one of being relational. Now, certainly our animal kingdom is definitely very relational. Animals, work in packs, or they have relationships, and parents care for children in different ways, all that stuff. Sometimes after they mate, they bite each other's head off. That's still relational. It's just a different kind of relational than what we do. But the primary aspect here is that we are in a relationship with God in some unique way, that he's made us these representative rulers on creation, and that we have that whether or not we fully fulfill it or not, that we are still in relationship with him. And so when we think about modern AI, for example, we would say that AI in many ways is better reasonably than us. And maybe if we were to give it certain tasks, it would actually be better functionally than us, and yet it wouldn't still have this unique relationship with God. Even if we get to a fourth model, might be an existential model, like a longing for God that is distinct to humanity. Even if your AI eventually gets to the point where it starts to ask questions about its creator, it still doesn't have that unique relationship with God that we would say. So those are more or less the three models. Are those close to what you talked about? Very good? Okay, good. Good review, y'all. This was excellent work. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on that functional part of it, because when we get into, we've got Genesis 1, have dominion over all creation. All of a sudden we go into Genesis 2, and it zooms in on the Garden of Eden, and it says there was no shrubs yet, there were no plants there yet, and there were two problems. Do you guys remember what the two problems were in Genesis 2? Well, yes, that's going to come in a minute. But before that, the reason why there were no plants, there's two reasons why there's no plants. No water, yes, and no... Yes, no people, no one to cultivate and keep the earth. And so this is when God creates something out of dust and breathes life into him, and he becomes a living being. And so here you see two kind of commands, cultivate and keep, in the New American Standard Version. There's different translations of those, but cultivate is the word from which we get culture. So all the tool-making, physical use of things that we create and we make is in that word. And so elsewhere where you're going to see it, you're going to cultivate with a hoe or with a shovel or with an oxen or something like that. And then keep is a little bit more of a guard or preserve or take care of type term. So in some contexts, it would be like a soldier who would be keeping a tower and watching over things. But in the context of gardening, it's caring for it. And I think what you see is these sort of two sides of things. One is a call to make from what God has made, that God makes from nothing, ex nihilo, but he gives us the idea that we can make from the things that he's making. We can find those materials deep into the ground. And then the keeping, guarding, preserving is something about, we need to hold on to our humanity in some way, that we don't want to totally give ourselves over to the Borg or whatever technology image you have, that there's a call to both create and preserve that God gives us in those two words that we're going to try to be balancing out. So that gives us, in a sense, a creation care mandate, but also a care for ourselves, that we don't want to be totally taken over by these things, which it seems like we're sometimes falling into. For example, if you use your phone as an alarm, you might be, the first thing you do might be to start scrolling a little bit, and then you find yourself doing that before you go to bed, before you put it down, and it almost feels like we're not doing a lot of preserving of our humanity in that moment. We're almost entirely given over to it. So if you think this is the original command God gives us, early in Genesis, before even God creates Eve, he asks Adam to make something. Do you remember what he asked him to make? Ding, ding, my friend in the front. Name the animals, right? So he asked him, in a sense, to create language. And I just want to give you an example of this, about how powerful this can be. So notice these two words. I want you to just kind of picture one of each of these people. It's in your mind. Close your eyes, whatever. Okay. So I'm going to show you then an outline of that person. And there's some chance that you pictured them the opposite way, right? Some chance of that. Just because, we have this, what we might call bias in our mind of what we've learned, that doctors tend to be men and women tend to be nurses. Now, we would all say that men and women are both fully capable of that. We've all had the opposite one. We've all had male nurses, and we've all had female doctors. But this is kind of built into our language, built into cultural assumptions. And believe it or not, when you teach an AI, you just say, here's some books, go read. And then you say, what do you associate with these words? It learns those same kind of associations that we've gathered. Similarly, with different names, you begin to see different associations with what you think about those names and what they mean, and they bring in a whole bunch of stuff. And then in our recent dialogue, these kind of words also have meant all kinds of things. My point here is that when Adam is labeling the animals, that seems like a very neutral thing. But when we label someone as conservative or liberal, we label them as anti-choice or pro-life. right? Those different labels that we do, they shape what we see and we don't see about people. And they say, if you want to get to know a culture, you really need to know its language, LOL, right? If you want to know how people actually talk, you have to understand those words. And so we even see today in modern texting lingo that you probably have come across a word that your kids use, whether it's Riz or whatever it is that you didn't grow up with, that you're now trying to learn. And so this gets people in groups or out of groups. And so language is this really important thing that now we are teaching machines to do. And so they're learning from this data, but they don't really have an experience to put it into or a context to put it into. And so they're really super good at a lot of things, if any of you have messed with the various chat GPTs or whatever. And yet they're also this kind of overconfident dummy, in some ways, but they're also really sharp. Yes, sir.
Question. Do you
Yeah.
feel that God created the capability for language, or did he create the language itself?
So the question is, did God did he create all the words that humans would ever use, or did he give us the capacity to create? I would probably go more on the later part, that he gave us the capacity to create. I think just like the sort of garden has all these things in it, and then we can make things from that. I think he gives us some of that freedom. I don't know that for sure of what exactly when God made Adam and when he said something to Adam about eat from this, you can eat from anything, but don't eat from this one or you will die. I don't know.
When you go to psychology classes, like they'll analyze your brain, they say certain centers of your brain are speech,
Mm-hmm.
and they manage
Yeah.
language, and then other parts do visual, hearing. So I was thinking maybe he created the capability
Yeah.
in us, and then somehow we used what he created.
Yeah, I think that's getting more in the direction I would go. But of course, I would also say that God does talk to Adam, and so something is there, and I don't know how that works. So, he goes, weird. Yeah, that's good. So that's in creation. My point here is that even though we don't see Adam and Eve, directly using tools, they're making things. They're called to make things. God is asking Adam to take care of the garden, to put a bridge over this part, and to move these things around. That's all the original command that we're called to do. So we move from this first little symbol here is for creation, and then we move down into the fall. And I love that the company on the back of my laptop here uses a symbol that looks a little bit like what we think of as the fall. And if you know anything about the Mac's history, the first Mac was $1,000, and they gave it 33% off. Can anybody do math? You can do the math? Yeah. I don't think they knew the significance of that potential pricing structure of $1,000, 33% off, but it's just a fun part of the story. Anyway, so what did Adam and Eve do? They introduced sin and evil into the world. What's the very first thing they do? Before even they hide. Good point. One verse before that. What's that? Yes, it says that they make something. They actually sow fig leaves. I don't know what they use to sow them, but they do some physical action that is putting things together to make themselves fig leaves. Now, you've been around church for long enough that you probably know some theology behind the fig leaves, right? You know that this is Adam and Eve, in some sense, covering their own sin. And then God comes along, and what does he do to them? Does he say, he curses the ground? He says that work's going to be hard. He curses the serpent. He says, Eve, you're still going to get to have babies, but it's going to hurt. What does he say about their act of making? Does he say, no? Stop it. What does he do? He improves on it, right? He gives them like the first world's free tech upgrade in that moment. Now, the thing we know theologically about this is that God has to, we think, kill something to cover them up. And so it's they can create some kinds of things, but if this is symbolically about covering their own sin, then God is going to have to intervene, and something's going to have to die to cover them up fully. And what I think we can see in that is, one, that God is validating things for us. But I think this just reminds us again, this sort of idea of the non-neutrality of technology that always means something to us. For example, right now, if you lost your keys, you'd probably be bummed out, but if you lost your phone, you'd probably freak out. It means something to you. It's very significant in your life, and I think all of these things are shaping us in some way, but they also mean a lot to us. I also think it's some freedom for God in that he is saying, technology is originally for us to cultivate and care for the garden. It's for us to make the world into something glorious for him and to serve and function as his image bearers in this functional capacity. But here, I think God is sanctioning the use of some tools to overcome some of the effects of the fall. If he is helping them make clothing, I think he is initiating that. But very, very quickly, we can see that humans begin to shift this in an unhealthy direction. So they've got this power that they can use to mitigate some of the effects of the fall. So my wife would say, yay epidurals, that she really enjoyed that it overcame some of the effect of the fall. But you see, one of the characters early on that makes one of the world's first cities. You remember what character in Scripture makes the first city? Hint, he killed someone. And God said, you should wander. And he said, no, I'm not going to wander. I'm going to plant myself down. And so he builds this kind of anti-garden, the first city here in Genesis 4. And the interesting part about this is that he still, bears this image of God. He's still a creative making person. And so his descendants go on to make agriculture, which we talked about earlier. They go on to make music. They go on to make tools. And so they can't help but continue to bear the image of God. Now, he is, in a sense, amassing tools and technology and things around himself to insulate himself from his need for God or other people, which sounds a lot like Amazon Prime to me. But he's really trying to separate himself. He's making an alternate garden here and trying to say, God, you've given me this ability, but I don't want to use it for you. Instead, I want to use it for me and for my people and for my domination of the world, not to have dominion, but to have domination. And they begin to hope in the tools that they have. And we see this, all throughout history, where people will invent something that they think is going to save the world, and it turns out it doesn't. So Alfred Nobel is famous for this, that he invented dynamite, and he thought, man, this is going to bring peace to the world. And when he realized, of course, that it didn't bring peace to the world, then he decided to use his money to make the Nobel Peace Prize, because he realized he can't undo what he made, but he can try to redirect some of the money. The Wright brothers thought the same thing. They thought airplanes would bring peace to the world, and they didn't. Today, we're a little bit more cynical. So here's the founder of OpenAI. He just says, AI will probably lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there'll be great companies. So it's a little bit more of a nihilist view that you see in that moment. And so I think this is where we start to see that before we're even talking about, blisters or calluses, that it does seem to be that when Paul talks about following the flesh or the self-directedness or the spirit or toward what God would have us be doing, that technology seems to be able to fuel that selfishness for us, that it's so capable and powerful that it can direct us inwardly at ourselves, almost at any moment, whether it's physical tools or our more modern individual ones. But as we move along in the story, into this, what I'm calling anticipation, the things leading up to Jesus, the Old Testament, there's all these places where God, I think, goes out of his way to say, I still care about the things that you make. The first one is just, this story. You think about this as very theologically, very Christotelic. There's a righteous man on an object made of wood, going over death and destruction to save the human race. Again, very much looking toward Jesus in so many ways. Noah, of course, fails in the end. But God, this is the God who could have killed humanity with any number of ways, and yet chose to make human creativity part of the story of salvation in this moment. In fact, Genesis, the stories are super short, and in this moment, he goes out of his way to talk about what type of material to use and all this additional stuff. Even in the Tower of Babel story that we often refer to when we think about technology, remember, God doesn't destroy the technology that they use. He works at that fundamental level of language to get humans to do what he always called them to do, which is to be fruitful and multiply and fill the whole earth. So God is redirecting us on the path that he has for us rather than just destroying everything that we make when he doesn't like it. And then here he's going out of his way to make it be part of the story that we tell. So this is normally about, animals and all that cute stuff and rainbows, but this is about God's promise of saying, I care about your body, I care about your soul, and I care about what you make. I'm going to redeem your soul. I'm going to resurrect your body. But the things you make are going to last in some way. As we go through the story, we're going to see that. So that's with some of the stories that you see in the Old Testament, that he cares a lot about them. There's also places where we begin to see that the things we make begin to remake us in some ways. So you remember the story of the Israelites. They are freed from captivity. They've been in slavery for a long time. They go out into where Moses goes up onto Mount Sinai. He's up there, and he's up there for a long time. And so remember, the Israelites, their life kind of wasn't very great in Egypt. It wasn't awesome, but they knew how everything was expected. They knew what every morning was going to be. They knew what every day was going to be. They knew who they worshiped. They knew who they were. And now all of a sudden they're out in the desert and life doesn't make sense. They're in this place of sort of displacement. And they don't have anything to like order their life around. And their leader now is gone. Who knows where he is when he's coming back? And so what do they do in that moment? They make an idol, right? So we know they made an idol. Idols are bad. Next slide, right? But I think there's something more significant going on there, because remember, what is God giving Moses up on the mountain? The law. And then what else comes with the law? There's the 10 Commandments, but what else? Promises, yeah. What comes along with that? There's more stuff. The sacrificial system, and what's around the sacrificial system? Where do you do that? At the altar, right? And where is the altar? Yeah. So God is giving them all these things. Notice what those are. Those are patterns and practices. Those are a way of life to make life make sense and to order our life around what's really true. That sin matters, but God is going to redeem us. There's all these things that are coming. And this is exactly, in a sense, what they're doing. Yes, they make a false god, but what they're looking for is something to order their life around. The world's confusing. It's scary. There's people who want to enslave us over here. There's a desert over here where we don't have food. Where do we go? We're looking for things that we can order our life around. And that's exactly what God was giving them. They just waited one more chapter. And the very first time, notice this, all this stuff that he's going to give them, the tabernacle, all this stuff, the very first time the Spirit of God descends on a person, it wasn't Abraham, it wasn't Moses, it wasn't Joshua. Do you know who it is? Yeah, the artisans, right? Bezalel and his buddy that starts with an O that I can't pronounce. This is the very first time the Spirit of God comes on a person. And it's talking about his skills and his ability to take a largely illiterate people who don't have their own Bibles, don't have iPhones with 1 million translations on them, and to show them what God was like with things that smelled and things they could see, things they could feel, things they could do, that those things would enact what God cared about and who they were. It gave them an identity. It shaped their meaning. It shaped their purpose, shaped their history. It shaped how they interacted with one another. So Moses got the law, the abstract principles, the theology, but he also got a set of practices. And those practices are oriented around things that we make. And so here in this moment, Bezalel is really almost just as important. I think this gives those of you who may or may not be in kind of sort of crafts or jobs where you're making something or doing something. These are really important because they order our lives. But when we think about, I think about like the pandemic time period where everybody had a life that made sense. All of a sudden, it didn't make sense for a couple moments. People were searching for meaning. They were playing Wordle. They were doing sourdough starters. They were trying to find some practice, some ritual that would make things make sense. And this is what people are looking for. The problem is that we sort of gravitate toward the easiest thing most of the time. We gravitate toward whatever's on our phone or whatever news is going on. And we spend more time, we get that screen time notification on Sunday, and we kind of panic a little bit that we spent more time than we thought because we gravitate toward ease. We gravitate toward, in a sense, kinds of idols, don't we? Things that order our lives in ways that maybe are not always helpful for us. But even in the 10 Commandments, we can see just how important images are or the things that we make are. So the first commandment is about who God is. You will not have any other God besides me. The second commandment is about how we use technology to reinforce the theology of the first commandment. The first commandment is theological. The second commandment is technological. It's saying that the images, that the things that we use, remember how I used those fonts earlier and they sent you different messages? The tools and technology we use to worship God also send us different messages. It's baked into the 10 Commandments. Again, the first one is about who God is. The second one is about how important it is for us to be aware of the tools that we use. So we talked about online church earlier and sort of how that can shape our expectations of what God is, what church is, what community is, what worship is, what truth is. All that stuff is very important. The 10 Commandments said it way before I did. But I think this is important for us to pay attention to all the symbols that are around us, the things that we're constantly using, the things that we watch, the news sources to be in a really obvious way, but also just the patterns. Half of you may do this news source, half of you may do this news source, but if all y'all are on your screens all the day long, that's going to shape you in particular ways. And these are very important to us because they, again, influence what we believe. There's a couple more things in the Old Testament that I think are just worth us pointing to. One of them is this great little passage in Deuteronomy 22:8. When you build a new house, make a parapet around your roof so that you may not bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house if someone falls from the roof. What do you think this has to do with technology today? If you're a tech worker or a maker, what does this tell you?
You need guardrails.
Guardrail to prevent evil. What else? Or somebody else said something over here. Yeah. I mean, so I think of this as sort of having three steps. One of them is it doesn't say if, right? It says when. So there's an expectation that you're going to build. This is what we're called to do. This is going back to the garden. You're going to build stuff from what God's made.